So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
Welcome to our weekly marriage hour here on Trending. Joining me in just a moment will be Cristina Pineda. She is our celebrity and royal matchmaker in-house here on Trending. You know her from Matchmakers in the City. We're going to be diving into a handful of important topics surrounding dating. Maybe you're terrified of the idea of being, as some people might put it, saddled with a child, or basically resigned to being home, a stay-at-home mom. We'll unpack that and what to do when dating, when you have discomfort with the idea of being a stay-at-home mom and being a mother overall. We'll also dive into the topic of safety in dating. You may find this shocking. I don't know. I was pretty surprised when I heard news that one Canadian Olympian was forced to choose between her baby and going to the Olympics. I'll share with you how the story unfolded and much more, filling you in on what's happening in the Olympics 2021 Summer Olympics Tokyo. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie during our weekly marriage hour. Joining me now is Cristina Pineda from Matchmakers in the City. You can find them at matchmakersinthecity.com. Cristina, with everyone kind of returning to in-person dating, although poor Los Angeles is starting to go through a little bit of a lockdown again, let's talk about safety when dating. And when I say safety in dating, I don't mean having to do with COVID and vaccines, but the reality is there can be a lot of catfishing, stalkerish situations that occur with dating. And I think a lot of people could use kind of a how-to for just practical things, from everything from drinking, locations, how to end the night, who drives, and much more. So fill us in on with your how-tos for dating safely.
Yeah, so good to be on with you, Timmerie. And I know we've all heard the term stay safe way too many times, especially in the past year. But people are always wondering, well, what does that mean for dating? Does that mean only to date online, to do virtual dates, especially in LA right now, say no to your best friend's in-person maskless birthday party? These are all bad ideas. So I do not recommend that you only turn to online dating to stay safe, because usually online has more problems. And this especially came to the forefront in my mind when 2 weeks ago, my sister gave a talk, and she's the co-founder of Matchmakers in the City with me. She gave a talk called Dating Post-COVID at the first in-person Theology on Tap since the lockdowns. And during the question and answer section, a young woman shared that she had a stalker who started following her after she tried online dating for the first time during quarantine. So these tips are really important to keep in mind wherever you're meeting someone, but especially if you are online dating. And the first one is to get his or her first and last name before you meet with the person. And this is to do your own background check on the person before you meet. And yes. I don't mean stalking them on Facebook, looking at every little photo and then saying, oh, I don't want to meet with a person because he has this photo of him and a teddy bear from 10 years ago. We don't want to get too picky with this. But if you see his Facebook and he has a photo of him and his girlfriend on there, that's something to pay attention to. Mm-hmm. So just having that first and last name, as well as their real phone number, so that you can do your own Google searches. Make sure, look at the first and second pages of Google, look at the photos, make sure there's nothing weird going online. That's important. And this is with going along hand in hand with doing your own background checks of the person. And at Matchmakers in the City, we background check every single person who we work with. And it's a combination of things that we do. We do work with a third-party background check company. But we also do things that you can do yourself. And those include going to mugshots.com, doing sex offender searches
Yes, I love it. Oh, and I have to interrupt you for just a moment.
Yes, please.
And we'll go through this list, but we actually have a couple family members who are law enforcement. And it's great because sometimes you do want to know. And we've had family members say, hey, can you check out this person before I, go on a date with them? And then other times you accidentally mention the name and boom, they checked before you can even know. And just so you know, this person's safe. Or this is how many parking tickets, speeding tickets, and X, Y, and Z this person has, just so you know. It's one of those moments of, thanks, I didn't ask, but wow, that was a lot of information before I was ready for it. So you said mugshots. You should also check
mugshots.com.
Okay, what else?
Mugshots.com. There's sex offender records are public. So go on that website, do a sex offender search, do a social media. We do social media checks as well, looking to see what's public, what you can actually get at. And I do recommend friending the person and on all of those places if you can before you meet. And even if you've met in person, it's good to just see what they're posting on there. Make sure that they don't have ex-boyfriend or a boyfriend or girlfriend on those recent photos.
Like that recent story. Did you hear about the guy who had 70 girlfriends? I don't know. It was a bunch of girlfriends. We covered it a couple months ago here on the show. Patrick may correct me. I don't remember how many girlfriends he had, but he had a lot. I don't know how he remembered all of their names. I mean, he had to have had flashcards to keep up with this. It was horrific, but at the same time, I'm like, man, that guy's got some, I don't know if you want to say game or what he's got, but that's a lot of work.
That is. Wow. Yeah. You don't want to be with one of those, definitely. So that's why it's important to, and if someone's being sketchy about, I don't want to share that, I don't want you to be friends with me on Facebook, that's kind of a red flag. So definitely pay attention to those things. And then we'll move on to drive yourself or get an Uber to the date there and back until the person who you're dating has proven his or her trustworthiness, because you don't want to get in a car with someone who you don't know. And I love that if you have a relative in law enforcement and they're willing to do a background check, that's great, because they will look at criminal records of the person, properties that the person owns, relatives, anything that it's just important to know, does this person have a criminal history? So that's always a plus if you have someone in law enforcement. And then another one is for you to date in public places. Don't go on hikes until later down the line of when you've gotten to know this person.
Or anything remote at all. Sitting late at night, looking at the ocean water, walking along the beach, you name it. There's so many things I think people do remotely that maybe are relaxing and fun, but maybe not the safest in the first couple of dates.
It's true. And especially during this time, people have had to be really creative with where they're dating. And they may think that it's more normal now to go on hikes and one-on-one beach excursions, but it's better to do everything public. And of course, don't invite the person back up to your place or go into his or her place. Those are really important, especially until you've really gotten to know the person. And even then, you have to be careful because of temptation. Timmerie and I have talked about this many times. Another one is for you to go on group dates. And this sounds very campy Christian, but it's a really good way to get to know someone. And worst case, you don't like the other person, you had fun with your friends. You don't have to do all of your dates as group dates. I recommend that you don't, because sometimes certain people's personality doesn't come out when they're in a group. They may take a back seat. So you'll want to sprinkle in group dates with one-on-one dates, but see who the person is friends with. See who they're spending their time with, and see if you can all enjoy each other's company. And this also goes right into my number 6, which is meet people organically at events from a trusted friend and or a matchmaker. Build community. It's wonderful if you've already gotten to know the person you're dating in a context of a young adult group, or maybe you volunteered together, or maybe a friend introduces you to that person. this is just so nice because they're already coming with a recommendation from that friend or matchmaker that this is someone who's worthy of spending time with. And then yes, of course, save kissing for the future. You don't know where they've been and if they have STDs.
This might sound like a little bit of a scare tactic. I mean, I just spent the week with Pam Stenzel in California, and if you know anything, she's worked in the crisis pregnancy centers for years, and the reality is, ladies, sexually transmitted diseases impact women far more than they impact men in their reproductive future, so it is important to have knowledge of someone before you sleep with them or put yourself in a circumstance where you end up sleeping with them but didn't necessarily want to or plan to or know enough about them.
It's true. And then, you can, even kissing, these are things that you have to be very cognizant of in terms of staying safe. And we don't mean, sometimes when people say, oh, have safe intimacy, and doesn't mean using a condom. That's not safe. That's not,
right.
Just don't do it.
Condom
That's
doesn't
why
keep you safe.
No, and that's not what safety means. And that's why the word safety, we really have to define it because it's just thrown about these days. And then another one is number 8, is to friend or follow the person on social media before you meet up. I've already talked to you about that. And you might feel awkward doing this. You might say, oh, what if the person doesn't want to share that with me, or maybe it's too soon. It's important. It's keeping you safe. And if that person doesn't want to share it with you, they better have a really good reason why.
That's Cristina Pineda here on Trending with Timmerie. We have 2 more tips for staying safe while dating. She's a celebrity and royal matchmaker. Cristina, people can find you at matchmakersinthecity.com. If you're just joining us now, you're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. Cristina, let's hit the last 2, and then I do have another question for you with regard to safety in dating.
Okay, great. So number 9, don't share personal details about yourself until trust has been established. So
give an example.
Yes, and this is the problem. So that young woman who shared that stalker story at the talk that my sister gave, she probably had shared with him too much information, where she went to church, for instance, or where she lived. You want to keep those details pretty personal until you actually meet up with the person and you've done all this background checking and there's a certain level of trust. So know that stalkers are out there and try to refrain from saying anything that might let them know where they can find you at all times. And then we'll do number 10, last one, is have a trusted friend or parent know where you are at all times to check in with you when you arrive at the date and then when you come home. This is very important so that keeps you accountable, just in case you might be tempted to go up to that person's place, but okay, I have to check in with my friend when I get home. So she's looking out for me, or he's looking out for me.
I'll never forget when we were in high school, one of my dear friends ended up dating a guy that we knew very well. She went on her first date with him. I think she was 17, just on the verge of turning 18. And her father and brother went along on the date, sat behind them in the movie theater by a couple of rows throwing popcorn at them. It was just the funniest thing. The poor girl, I mean, apparently didn't scare him off. He's now her husband. They've got children. But, the simple, funny things that we laugh at, it's a reminder of the importance of safety, of vetting people, of having other people really acknowledge whether or not this is someone who's a safe individual for you to be with. And this is someone who had known the family for years. But it was a matter of keeping that person accountable, and you just don't know sometimes.
It's true. I love chaperones. I wish I could chaperone all of our members' dates. It would be so much fun.
Okay, so I have a couple questions. If you're just joining us, that's Cristina Pineda from Matchmakers in the City. She's a royal and celebrity matchmaker. Cristina, you didn't mention anything about drinking when dating. I feel like this is a topic that is under-discussed, but really one that leads you to unsafe environments in pretty much all of these 10 categories that you just listed. What do you advise in terms of drinking and dating?
So at Matchmakers in the City, we have a 2-drink max policy in our dating guidelines. And I would say that's even too much for
I was about to say that's a lot for most people.
Yeah, for some big men, that may not be a lot. But for most women, that's a lot. And I would say if you're going to have a drink, have it be a glass of wine and be cognizant. And if you don't drink at all and you're having a glass of wine, know that it's going to have an effect on you. And I probably wouldn't drink, especially if you don't know the person. And then when you get to know the person a little more, then you can have a drink or a glass of wine. But just be very careful, because also people can slip roofies into your drinks, and especially if you're out at a bar or a club. That has unfortunately happened to some of the members who I've date coached. And they had no idea what hit them. They put their drink down for a second, and then it is so upsetting when something like that happens, and you can really get into just be taken advantage of when
date
that
rape is
happens.
real. We have to be frank about it. And I just spent the last week in Los Angeles with a number of young Catholic pro-life leaders, and the number of questions and topics that came up surrounding the idea of date rape and the rape culture that we live in, and even the state of California legalizing the date rape drug for recreational use. I mean, this is the reality of the world we live in. And so I personally am a fan of no drinking while dating until far into the dating experience, and even then being careful and cautious. Because the reality is your guard is down. You're in a different circumstance. Once you know someone really well, you start to make excuses. And so, I mean, just why not save drinking for a safer environment where you're sure, you're confident, and you have self-control? I think that's so important to have.
I absolutely love that, Timmerie. And it's also important to keep your eye out on the person's drinking habits as well. It's easy to make excuses for that person if you are starting to fall for that person of, oh yeah, it was just, he got a little drunk, but that's okay. Those are things to watch out for.
Red
it's
alert.
not okay.
Yeah.
No, exactly. And it's very common in college, and it's alcoholism, and it's preparing people for alcoholism. So just know that those are real red flags that you have to pay attention to. I love saving drinking for later in the relationship.
And don't make excuses. Don't make excuses for the people you're dating. I think that brings up a really good point where you mentioned where a woman will make an excuse for a guy over drinking. We got to be careful. And we're not expecting perfectionism. There's a fine balance. I think that's important to bring up. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. If you have a question for our celebrity and royal matchmaker, Cristina Pineda, go ahead and give us a call. The number's 1-888-914-9149. We're going to come back with a little bit of a hot topic, and that is how to date and have conversations if you don't want to be a stay-at-home mom, you have fear about being a mom. Always a candid and hot topic here on Trending during our weekly marriage hour. Cristina Pineda will be right back. Again, if you have a question, number's 1-888-914-9149, or you can ask on my Instagram story. We'll be right back. Catholic Order of Foresters is proud to sponsor the Relevant Radio studio line. For information about employment opportunities and flexible premium life insurance plans, visit relevantradio.com/Forester.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
If you have a question for our celebrity and royal matchmaker, Cristina Pineda, give us a call. The number's 1-888-914-9149. You can also ask your question up on my Instagram story. Follow me. Stay connected with the show, topics, fun baby photos, you name it. Follow me at Timmerie. That's Timmerie. We'll let you know what we're talking about on the upcoming shows as well. And I love to hear from you and what you would like to hear discussed. So, celebrity and royal matchmaker Cristina Pineda is with us, and she said, let's talk about how to date if you don't want to be a stay-at-home mom. My first reaction when I heard this topic, Cristina, was, whoa, this is a lot to kind of, I think, discuss on Catholic radio. And the reason I say that is because historically, traditionally, moms have always raised their children. It's really only been the last 100 years where we've seen this transition of moms working outside of the home rather than really what was side by side with their children and outsourcing the raising of their children. Grant, the elite had nannies for their kids, and we could discuss that, but the average person was raising their children side by side while doing housework or working within their businesses together with their children. And so this question, this dilemma is so new. And part of me really, I think I want to talk about some of it from kind of the views people have today, negativity toward women and motherhood. But what's going on in the date coaching world that you're seeing surrounding this topic before we dive into kind of the Catholic side of it?
Yes, and I brought this up to you because I've recently had an influx of young professional women coming to me and telling me that they don't want kids, and being pretty adamant about it. And then I try to go a little deeper of why. And they tell me that they fear that their future husband would make them stay at home, and they've just worked so hard for their career and to get out of their small town, and they don't want to be strapped down again. I think a lot of it also comes from a fear of men and trusting, right, and a lack of trust for men. And maybe some of the men in their lives have mistreated them or shown them that if the man holds the power and makes the money, then they don't have power or say in the relationship anymore. And then they are putting all of this work and doing unpaid, unappreciated labor. A lot of feminists have talked about this, that the woman's work at home and is unpaid, unappreciated labor for some people, but that's a certain way to see it that I don't agree with. Right. However, some women feel like that, and maybe they saw their mom go through something like that.
Yes, you know, Christina, this is something that I keep thinking about, because I think that today we almost have as a culture this negative view, not just of motherhood, but also of women, you know, making women to be like men. You know, corporate world wants a masculine version of a woman. And I think that this stems not just from the idea of a lack of respect for what moms do, but the fact that you hit the nail on the head with men. It's men and women, the fathers and moms that we have been exposed to. I think a lot of people have this idea that mom has been devalued in their own life, perhaps even treated like a doormat. And because of that, the lack of respect from their own father or the lack of presence from their own father to help mom out or be there, there's really been this developed lack of respect for motherhood as a whole. And so what it sounds to me like you're saying is that some of these women are trying to put up boundaries in terms of what they want, but they're going too far by almost completely writing out the idea of either becoming moms to begin with or being present to their children more than in the evening and the morning.
Yes, I think that's exactly it. And we also have, our culture has a pretty negative view on children in general. So they've been probably raised with that, and maybe they've babysat. A lot of young women have babysat. I have, and a lot of the kids I babysat were pretty unruly. So I remember saying to my dad, I never want children. And he said, don't worry, Christina, it's different when you have your own. So I understand.
Fun fact about this, and I don't know if you know this, I'm not sure if we talked about it. I don't really like kids. I've said that before, and people are always horrified. Even my producers, every time I say it, go, what? They can't believe it. I don't really like kids that much, and I think it's because so many of them are so bratty, so poorly behaved. Their parents don't tell them no. I've said it before. I one year made the mistake of volunteering for Vacation Bible School. Talk about penance. That is like so not my thing, because I remember I said no to one of the kids in the first like 5 minutes, and I was corrected for saying no to a child. I'm like, I'm out of here, man. These kids are brats, and I can't say no. I did have to finish out the full week commitment. It grew on me slightly, but I said never again. And I think the problem is that kids are just so disrespectful today, and parents also aren't, you know, this parent-child relationship is so damaged that I don't blame people for never wanting to have children like yourself.
Wow. I'm so happy you brought that up, Timmerie, because you're right. And especially when you're babysitting or doing a vacation Bible study, it's not your word is not really in control. It's the parents who are in control. And when it's your own children, you are the one who sets the discipline. So that's really important. That's what I tell a lot of the women who I work with, that you are the one who's setting the control, setting the boundaries for your kids. They don't have to behave like the children of your friends or the children of the people you babysat. Amen. You can set down what your boundaries are for your children. And I was in similar situations like that, where I even got in trouble at a camp because I had told a young woman that what she was wearing was inappropriate, and that was the worst thing I could have ever done. I had to have a special meeting with the president of the organization and the family of the girl.
Christina was boss from the beginning. Dang, girl.
This was a long time ago, thank God, when I was in college. But we're similar in that way. And I similarly have told Dan and my husband on our first date that I got bored with kids. They can't talk Shakespeare with me, so what am I going to talk to them about?
You're a brat, just saying.
It was a strange thing to say on a first date. So I tell our women, you don't need to talk about kids in the beginning like that. But he still dated me, so it was fine.
That brings up a really important point, Christina, because I imagine you were saying that in part because you're also kind of saying, I don't know if I want to have kids, and now, of course, the Catholic view, we understand that we're called, fundamental to being married is marriage is oriented toward the procreation and education of children. If you don't want kids, you shouldn't be getting married. And it's something kind of hard to swallow for some, but I've had friends, I remember especially in college, Christina, who said, I don't want kids. I don't know if I can have kids. And knowing the church's stance, maybe I'm not called to marriage. And I remember saying over and over to some of my friends, that's okay if the idea of kids right now is terrifying. You're not at a point in life where you're ready. But also, you're not in a relationship, a permanent long-term dating and then almost a marriage relationship where you would be discerning having children with a particular person. And I think that this is where the conversation about kids must come into play. You have kids with a particular person and you make a commitment together to raise the children. That's very different than hypothetically talking about having or not having children, because that sounds pretty scary if you don't have all the pieces lined up.
Exactly. That's why it's really important not to make that a deal breaker in your life, because you haven't met that person yet who you would be sharing your life with. And you don't, at this moment, need to be ready for children. But especially for women saying this, it does cut off 99% of men, because most of these men want to at least to be open to the potential of having children. And who knows, maybe you won't be able to. I don't know if it's a biological thing that's different. But it's really important. Just keep yourself open to it and take it slow with the person. You don't need to get married in 5 days. You can grow and see and discern if this relationship is right, and if you could potentially see yourself being long-term and having a family. So there's no rush, and that's the thing. You'll meet, if you're truly called to marriage, God will put a man in your life who you will be able to trust, and those fears about him having this power and control over you, they're going to vanish because you will be able to trust him and know that he would not ever do that to you. Mm-hmm. So I think it is a boundary that some women are putting up that is preventing them from meeting the right person. So if this is you, if you're scared, I want you to really pray about this, journal about it, and ask the Lord to soften your heart and ask him to give you a little bit of insight into why you're having this reaction.
And I think that another thing to kind of put in there is we see in a lot of the social studies, and I actually just talked about this a couple weeks ago on the show. Patrick will put a link to it in the show notes for the podcast. You can find that at relevantradio.com/trending, where we discussed both the idea of stay-at-home dad, should dads be stay-at-home dads, but we also discussed a return to one family income. And I bring this up in the middle of a conversation about women who you say have come to you, Christina, for date coaching, who are scared about being saddled at home with a baby and suddenly becoming a stay-at-home mom. Well, I think a lot of these women don't realize that so many women today are expressing time and time again the pressure they're under to both quote unquote have it all and do it all, from both having the full-time job, being full-time housekeeper, being a caretaker for your children, being present to your spouse. Women across the nation and worldwide are saying that they either want part-time work or different working hours, but ultimately a lot of women are saying their goal is to work toward one income so that they can be home and take off the pressure, because the stress, the anxiety, and the lack of presence to children, and as we know, studies show kids need their parents, is telling women, both personally and sociologically, that moms are more important than society says today.
Yes. And also, it's important to realize that having children, it's not just like your brain is going to die. Having children is, and that was part of my fear, even though I was always open. It wasn't the first thing I was excited about with marriage. But I just personally have learned so much through having a baby and learning about baby development, learning about pregnancy. I say it's like getting your PhD. It's very intellectual to figure out what are they doing, how are they growing right now, what are they working on. And it's pretty fascinating. And then the other part about it is, if you're at home and you like going out and you like doing other things, you can find other ways to get out there. And maybe it's booking fun things for your family to do on the weekends, or booking a trip that you can look forward to. And but being at home is another way for you to get in touch with and develop your interior castle. This is a phrase that Saint Teresa of Avila has coined, and it's just discovering more of what is inside of you. And when we're forced to not do as many extra activities outside of the house, and of course you still can, I'm not saying you won't or you can't, but maybe a little less, and maybe looking inward, maybe doing more prayer, maybe focusing more internally and growing spiritually. So these are all things that are actually quite intellectually stimulating if you have to spend more time at home.
And I have kind of a story I'd like to share. A dear friend of mine, very well educated, has a master's degree, very intellectual, has traveled around the world doing missionary work. When she first had her kids, she didn't have any animosity toward having children, but when she first had her kids, she really dug her feet in. I'm not going to allow having kids to prevent me from doing things. I'm going to get out. I'm going to go and visit my friends who live a couple hours away. I'm going to do it as often as possible. I'm still going to go out to eat. I'm still going to go, and have fun hiking and traveling. And granted, some of the things she did, and because of her attitude, really seamlessly. Other times, I remember she took an overseas trip, and it was really hard, and it was challenging, but she recognized that if that was the type of life she wanted to live, she had to learn how to adapt. And I think that this is such a testament. Not everyone's necessarily going to be able to travel abroad with 2 children. However, I think that a lot of the time our mindset surrounding how we live our lives after having children and the types of parenting styles we have really speaks to how things can be done. Like, I don't blame people who are terrified of parenthood because they know all of their friends who insisted they had to be home at 6 o'clock every night for bath time and bedtime. If that works for you, great, but that's not how you have to parent. And I think society sometimes makes people think that you do have to be married every single day. And don't get me wrong, consistency, routine is important for kids, but that you have to be married to this routine that doesn't allow you to actually live life a little bit as well. And so I think that that's part of sometimes the conversation too.
I completely agree. And You don't, right, the way that you do parenting, the way that you do motherhood doesn't have to look the same as someone else. And maybe one of your friends, that is the way they do things. But babies are pretty adaptable. And you can, one of my good friends has said that over and over, that you don't have to live a life of, the minute you have a child, you don't leave your house, you don't travel anywhere. And some people do that, but that's scary.
And it's unhealthy. It's very unhealthy.
It is.
Okay, so if you have thoughts on this, I'd love to hear from you. If you've had fear about being a parent, the idea of it, let us know. You can write to us. Head over to relevantradio.com/trending. Reach out. You can connect by the contact page, especially on Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. But Christina, we have some questions coming in that I want to dive into. One, first short answer to this. Where, and this is coming from Tony on Twitter, where are the faithful Catholic ladies at?
Okay, well, you should have gone to the Theology on Tap talk that my sister did, because I saw many lovely single Catholic ladies at that talk. So this was at St. Monica's in Los Angeles area. If you're in the area. Where is he from, Timmerie?
I have no idea.
Okay.
We got people
so that's one
asking questions.
Yes, and Theology on Tap is a nationwide organization, and I think they do Theology on Tap talks in a lot of different cities. So that's something to look into. Young Catholic Professional Group is also a good one to look into.
And don't be afraid to let people know, hey, I'm looking to date a young, faithful Catholic person. Put the feeler out there into your network. Boy, I've got so many young female, good Catholic friends who are looking for a spouse. So have the conversations. I'm not asking for credentials to be sent my way. But I know they're out there. And I mean, you have friends. I have friends. You need to put yourself out there. You need to let people know, not in a creepy way. I think it's important. Okay, another question came in. Having to do on Instagram with the high value that women place on men, where some women only want a man who makes like $300K. This is, I think, a really good question. Like, women, I won't get married until I have this like phenomenal engagement ring or certain type of lifestyle. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, we tell people if they come into an initial meeting with us saying that's not how we work. We don't use salary as a deal breaker or any. We match people who are financially stable and successful, enjoying what they do, because that's a place where they're ready to find love. But I really advise against setting a dollar amount or saying they have to make more than me. That's just, it's not healthy. You're putting boundaries up, and those are not healthy boundaries.
Amen. Okay, another question, which is a follow-up from this, really, is it seems like the idea of having a 50-50 partnership is a thing of the past. Should men pay all the bills?
Ooh, okay. Once they're married?
Yeah, I think once they're married, kind of an approach going into marriage. And I'm just going to respond while you're kind of thinking this one over. The idea of a 50-50 relationship is like nil, non-existent. There's never 50-50. Sometimes it's 120. Sometimes it's 90-10. I mean, it can look different, but the reality is we are always called to give 100%. On both sides. Now, when it comes to money, I don't think we can reduce things to dollars and cents. And I think that sometimes that's a problem. In the 21st century, everything's about money for us. We're so materialistic. And so when we go into a marriage with too much of an expectation on the man for a certain type of income, or too much of an expectation in terms of this 50-50 mentality, I think that those are dangerous attitudes to take into marriage.
Yes, I think so too. And a lot of people have started doing joint bank accounts as well. It's an idea, and just putting in, because when you marry someone, what is yours is theirs and theirs is yours. So I wouldn't think of it in terms of a 50-50 way anyway, that even if you keep your own bank accounts, that you figure out a way that it's coming from both of you and in a way that works for your family.
That's Cristina Pineda, royal and celebrity matchmaker, also matchmaking us peasants here on Trending. You can check her out at matchmakersinthecity.com. I've also tagged her on social media, especially Instagram, where you can check her and her work out. We will be back continuing our conversation during the marriage hour. We're going to dive into the topic of the Olympics and marriage.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Okay, so this is a story that shocked me. I hadn't heard about it last month, but apparently one of the Tokyo Olympic contestants from Canada, in fact, a women's basketball contestant, was told, like all Olympic athletes, that they couldn't bring anyone with them to the Olympic competitions due to everything surrounding COVID. They couldn't bring a single friend, couldn't bring a single family member. I don't think that's okay to begin with. I mean, think about all the journalists, think about all the local people who are allowed to be around nearby in terms of the Olympics. I just don't think this is right and very human to begin with, but it gets worse. If you didn't hear, Kim Gotcher, along with others, were told they couldn't bring their children, including her daughter, who's 3 months old, in nursing. That's right, she's breastfeeding her child, and she was basically being told that she had to choose between nursing and caring for her baby girl and being an Olympic athlete. Listen to this.
All I've ever wanted out of my basketball career has been to rep Canada at the Olympics. Right now, I'm being forced to decide between being a breastfeeding mom or an Olympic athlete. I can't have them both. Tokyo has said no friends, no family, no exceptions.
I've always wanted to breastfeed my child. I mean, I'm a women's basketball player, and it's much cheaper, which is very helpful. And two, something that I've wanted to do. I enjoy doing it. I enjoy that bonding that I get with her. And so I want to be able to continue that. When I posted my story, I've been overwhelmed by the number of people that have reached out. It's a really strong community. And I think for the future, when Soph grows up, if she has a baby, I hope that she does not face these kinds of issues in the workplace.
Okay, so here's the story. It broke last month. I completely missed it. People were waiting on pins and needles. The world ended up supporting her, this mom, saying that we shouldn't be dealing with things such as this, that a mom can't take her own daughter with her during downtime to help nurse her child and care for her child. And to put some context to this, for an Olympic athlete, specifically for this basketball contestant coming from Canada, Kim Gotcher, she was going to have to be away from her child for 28 days. Now, I was horrified by the number of people when she posted this on Instagram who said, oh, just pump, it's fine, you can pump 28 days worth of milk. And I'm sorry, but I'm just so sick of this being what helps women to make up for not being present. You know how much pressure this puts on women, and a lot of women don't feel comfortable and don't want to have to pump in order to feed their children or settle for other types and options of milk. This is just a choice that a lot of moms are making. And so for this mom to be told that she has to do something unnatural by not naturally feeding her child, which is how God created the body to nourish a child, it's a pretty big deal. And so I found it fascinating to see that on one side, people say, oh, just pump. Well, that was literally going to be impossible for her to do prior to the Olympics, have 28 days worth of milk for her baby. But on the other side, people stood up and said, no, this isn't right. She should be able to take her daughter. And now initially the reaction from the Olympics as the appeal was made, people started objecting. They released statements to CBS News, you name it. And the Olympic people who are making this decision, the National Olympic Committees and the IOC, were all basically initially commenting to CBS that this is just the norm. And it's not, and they even claimed at one point, and I was shocked by this, I didn't know this. They said it's our understanding that no children stayed at the Olympic villages during previous games. So in other words, even in the past, not just now, children weren't allowed with their parents at the Olympic Games. Olympians have kids. I think there's something wrong with this whole idea, especially if it's a baby, a younger child. And I understand that we're all about the athletes and keeping people focused, but it's not easy to stay focused when you're that far away from your child and unable to communicate with them. That's also, I think, a very unhuman-centered approach to things. And so the good news is that the National Olympics Committee, the IOC, ended up coming out and made an exception for this Canadian basketball Olympian to make her way to the Olympics. This is fantastic news that they made the exception for her. But it makes me think about all the other moms and dads who didn't have that option, especially for the women whose babies are dependent on them for nourishment, such as when they're nursing. This is sometimes the challenge I think that the world poses when we talk about working moms, non-working moms. We often are in situations and environments that are hostile, extremely hostile toward children, and hostile as well toward the idea of family and having a different type of a work schedule, having a child with you at times. You see, here is, I think, a great example of how people have the opportunity to come together and help implement, I think, mindsets, not just policies. Because sometimes we emphasize, we need to have paid family leave, paid childcare, and all of these options. But I don't think that that's at the heart of the challenge for working moms or Olympic athlete moms. The problem is the hostile environment toward children and family. And we're talking about this during our weekly marriage hour, in part because I think we live in a culture where we have to acknowledge in marriages and families today, you have to make choices, and sometimes difficult choices, in order to uphold your family in society. Whether it's saying no to unrealistic and long hours and projects that keep you impossibly away from your family. Whether it's saying no to certain types of job offers that wouldn't be conducive for raising a family. You see, although this might be hard, although that might mean we have to make sacrifices, we tend to live in a culture where we're very me-centered. It's all about me. I find it fascinating that the Y generation, the I generation, as well as Gen Z have repeatedly been referred to as the I generation because they've grown up with everything being about me. I mean, even just the name, the iPhone, people have commented on, has become such a self-centered focus that we've lost sight of others. And so when we see this in the context of marriage and family, again, there are going to be choices that have to be made. I don't know what this Canadian basketball Olympic athlete, Kim Gotcher, would have done if the Olympics didn't make a rare exception for her to bring her 3-month-old daughter with her so that she could nurse the baby at the Olympic Games. I don't know what her decision would have been. Although my hope would be that she would choose her child even in the face of being an Olympic athlete, I think that a lot of people would be horrified at the idea of her, A, having to make the choice, which she almost had to, but B, even making the choice to stay home. People would say, but it's the Olympics. Olympics is an incredible achievement. But there's a problem when we put an achievement before other human beings. And I think this is the challenge of the 21st century. What does it mean to live to our fullest potential? What does it mean to show sacrificial love? At the heart of who we are as human beings is this desire to be known and a desire to give ourselves and be known by another. This is so profoundly written into our human nature and our deepest desires and longing. First and foremost, to be known by God and to know God, but to know those we love and to be known and loved by them as well. And you see, choices we make about career, choices we make about family vacations, choices we make about where we live. At the end of the day, when you have children in a family, that's the context we have to remember, that children do come first. As Catholics, the Catholic Church emphasizes that marriage is oriented toward the procreation and education of children. So the question is, what examples are we setting for children? What choices are we making that sets a precedence for children, even in a hostile environment in work and society that doesn't necessarily favor them? but as parents, you yourself can favor them. I find it fascinating because we were talking about this just a few moments ago with Cristina Pineda from the perspective of how she's seen so many women, professional women, coming to her saying that they're terrified of being in a dating experience where they feel that a man is going to expect them to be a stay-at-home mom, as if that's the worst thing in the world. I think the reason why so many people, and I mentioned this, if you missed the conversation, listen to the podcast, it's available tonight. But I think this is because not only have we devalued women, we've devalued motherhood. And in part because of the whole mindset today in our culture where we've seen fathers, husbands devaluing their wife and the mother of their children. That justifiably so, women don't want to see themselves or others treated as a doormat. But what's happened is it's led to this disconnect in terms of mothers to their children. And this is, I think, the challenge we have, is to draw the hearts of parents, especially mothers, back to this bonding with their children. To draw the hearts of future mothers to the openness to human life and to their children. There was a track athlete a couple years ago who didn't end up going to the Olympics because she found out she was pregnant. By all means, she and other people who probably could have aborted that child. But she acknowledged there's always another time to compete in the Olympics, but there isn't another time to have a baby. She had her baby and she got back in shape, and I don't know if she made it to the Olympics again. But what I do know is that time and time again, she emphasized that she made the right choice. And she delights in the child that she had, and her life wasn't ruined. It didn't end. But it continued, and it continued in a different and a better way than she ever could have planned.